This video does not contain any spoilers for both The Last of Us show and games. The Last of Us virus is a real thing, blah blah blah, we have all heard it. But what would it look like if it actually evolved to infect humans? For you uncultured people, the virus in The Last of Us is based on the cordyceps militaris fungus, which is a real fungus that infects insects and hijacks their bodies, then positions them in strategic locations, and produces spores from them, further spreading the fungus, essentially zombifying them. Currently, the fungus can't grow. In humans, our body temperature is normally between 37 degrees and 40 degrees Celsius, or 98 degrees 104 degrees Fahrenheit. Cordyceps can grow in a max of 30 degrees Celsius, but prefer to be closer to 25. Near the end, I'll discuss how likely it is that the fungus could evolve. But first, let's talk about what you clicked on this video for. I'm sure you have guessed that the show and games hype the fungus up a little bit, otherwise it would just be about people climbing to the tops of buildings to release spores, which honestly might be a little bit more scary since airborne infections are a whole lot worse. Bringing me to the first main difference, the fungus doesn't spread through bites, it spreads through spores. But could it not just evolve to spread through bites? Animals, plants, and anything in between evolve for two main reasons: to increase their survival ability or to make it more likely they get laid. Spreading through bites would kind of be useless for cordyceps militaris, because the current strategy of spreading through spores is pretty goddamn efficient if a single release of spores catches the right wind that can infect tens or hundreds of hosts. Maybe even thousands or tens of thousands if it's in a city, where a bite is limited to one infection per action. Although yes, the rate of infection grows exponentially as more people get bitten. But the same happens with spores, except much faster. The next difference is the capabilities of the fungus. The fungus, as the name suggests, is just a fungus. It's not capable of complex thought, or any thought for that matter. The show depicts the infected implementing some fairly good strategies. In real life, yes, the fungus makes the infected host climb to high points before it grows out of them and releases spores. But this is little more than an instinct of the fungus to make its host reach a high point before it expires, and can't actually differentiate a strategically good high point from a bad one. On top of this, the hijacking of the host is drastically over-exaggerated. The Last of Us depicts infected running, jumping, climbing, and doing each other's makeup in real life. The fungus doesn't actually control the host's brain. It can release neuroactive chemicals that can control nerve signals such as muscle fibers. That's how it gets the host to reach a high vantage point, but only gives it limited control over the host body, and definitely cannot make the host perform complex movements. The final ability of The Last of Us zombies that is a little bit overhyped is how the show depicts the fungus using a sort of hive mind that allows it to send hundreds of infected hosts to anywhere it detects survivors in real life. Each host is controlled locally by the individual spore that infected it. So if it infected humans, they wouldn't be able to communicate with other fungus people, or call the central hive mind helpline if things get too heated. On top of this, the fungus doesn't control the host for long, it gets it to a high point, then kills it. Before moving on to how humanity would absolutely nuke every one of these fungal motherfuckers into oblivion, I just want to say two things. No, don't worry, I'm not going to ask you to subscribe, but feel free to. Like how I done that very smooth, right? First, I love The Last of Us, and completely understand why the abilities of the fungus is exaggerated, but still feel free to leave angry comments next. Let's just recap what this so-called apocalypse would look like. You would have thousands of brainless mushroom people climbing to the highest point while pushing each other off, and then spraying spores into air and dying. So before we get into the standard apocalypse approaches of quarantining cities and bombing them, let me tell you some more simpler ways of going about this. First, been my own proposal of putting on as much clothes as you can, and banging out a few push-ups, raising your body temp and killing the fungus. But in all seriousness, there are hundreds of pre-existing antifungal meds that would have no issue killing cordyceps, and wouldn't take long to develop a one-time use vaccine that makes everyone immune to the fungus. As well as this, it's hard to believe that no one would see it coming. Cordyceps are a pretty interesting fungus and are constantly monitored by scientists. Evolution really doesn't happen overnight. It's pretty much a 100% guarantee that someone would notice as soon as the cordyceps evolved even the slightest bit. On top of this, it's not like they are some mysterious fungus people know what they are. What they can do so people would also know it's not good, if they are adapting to live in humans, and would definitely all be exterminated well before they even evolved enough to be a threat to us. Now let's say things got real bad and we had to take more desperate measures. I still think it wouldn't be all that hard to stop this from being as big of an issue as it is in The Last of Us. As already mentioned, it wouldn't happen out of the blue, so it's likely any countries that have the slightest risk of infection would immediately be cut off from trade, travel, or any forms of exports. With the rest of the world, even inside these countries, the same measures would be taken, on a more micro level to towns and cities at risk. But let's say they broke quarantine. It still wouldn't turn out how it does in The Last of Us. Again, places with outbreaks would be sectioned off. As I also already mentioned, antifungal medication isn't all that advanced, so infected area could easily be sprayed with antifungal chemicals from the air, quickly removing the threat. Okay, clearly things could be managed if worst came to worst, but what's the viability of worst actually coming to worst? The first hurdle the mushroom bitches would need to jump is the temperature one. Thermotolerant mutation is a complex process and can take millions of years just to adapt to a change in 1 or 2 degrees. That being said, Candida auris, a yeast fungus, did recently adapt to climate change. So it's not impossible, but that is a very, very rare case. So even if they got past the temperature barrier now, you gotta deal with the human immune system, which is completely different than in insects. The cordyceps would literally have remake every part of them. To attack the human immune system, which would be pointless, it would make more sense from an evolutionary perspective. To just improve at infecting animals that are already suitable. Finally, even if they did infect humans, the neuroactive chemicals would have far less power over us due to our brains being more advanced.